guys are joining the Christian Podcast. I'm going to record all of this and then it'll be, I can edit a few things here and there. But I'm really honored that both of you have joined this conversation. And I want to start up with a little bit with who I am, because I think this will bring perspective to our conversation. I am Beto Gudino. I am the host of the Christian Podcast. And I'm an immigrant. I live here in the United States. I've been here for about 15 years. But one of the things I love about this podcast is that we have people listening from around the world. So I think in a sense, I represent sort of the rest of the world. And in my own view, I see you guys as almost the epitome of Western civilization. You know, one former mayor, one current mayor. In terms of, you know, how capitalism works and that sort of stuff. And I think conversation is the way of the 21st century. So I would love to start with Marvin, who is our guest from far away. Who are you, Marvin? Could you tell us a little bit about your service as a mayor in Bristol? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I've never been described as the epitome of Western civilization before. so that's an interesting introduction. So I'm the mayor of Bristol. It's a city of near 500,000 people. We're about 100 miles west of London. We are one of the 11 core cities, which are the 10 biggest cities outside of London. Accounting for around a quarter of the UK's population between us. It's a very significant city. Over a third of the world's natural history broadcasting, Blue Planet, Planet Earth, and all those type of programs comes through Bristol. So, we're a city that has quite a global presence. And historically, Bristol was a port. And its relationship to the US through and the Caribbean through the triangular trade was really part of the one of the key drivers of Bristol's economy. I myself was born in Bristol. My dad came from Jamaica as a 12-year-old, and my mum is of Welsh English heritage, and before that Irish. And so my white heritage go back in the city for centuries. In fact, we recently found out that my great, however many greats grandfather was born in a workhouse, which was for the very poorest people in the city some time ago. So truly established in Bristol. And for me, this is just about making sure it's an inclusive city, making sure it's a city for everyone. And that the circumstances of your birth don't determine the circumstances of your life and your death.
So good. Thank you, Marvin. And let's go to Steve. Steve, could you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the city of Costa Mesa, your former mayorship, and what does that mean to you?
Sure, you bet. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm father of two boys and married for 35 years. I'm a native of California. Actually, our family came to California in the 1800s. And Marvin's interesting. A lot of my roots go back to England. Some French, but and a little bit of Danish, but a pretty good mix. My genealogy, my father's traced a genealogy back to 700. So.
Really?
There's a lot of English in all of us for obvious reasons. But anyway, I'm a business person here in California. I've been in the real estate industry for 35 years. I'm an alumnus of University of Southern California and grew up in the Central Valley, and moved to Costa Mesa in my younger years and stayed here. Got interested in politics and was the mayor, was on city council, planning commission, and in Costa Mesa for 9 years. And I was the mayor for the last 2 years of my term. It's a city of about 116,000, 16 square miles, bordered by Newport Beach and Huntington Beach. It's rich in history, but nothing like Europe in terms of we're relatively childlike when it comes to history. We've been around for about 125 years, in modernly, or 150 years, I should say, at this point. So anyway, that's my background. I'm a member of Beto's church, and I've gotten to know Beto, and he's a great guy. And I'll add that Beto's introduction was interesting. we're a nation of immigrants. There's no country on earth that has more of a mixture of immigrants than our country. And so, and you've talked to people, and every ethnicity has a story, and it's fascinating. There's not a lot of generational wealth in the United States. There is in the last couple generations, but it's really a small percentage. That this is a nation of entrepreneurs, and politically, my focus has always been how to level the playing field and let everybody realize that.
That's so good. Thank you, Steve. Yes, and what would you say? I want to start off with trying to laugh with each other a little bit, trying to make things not too
Serious?
intense at the beginning. I just want right now off the bat, would you tell me something embarrassing that has happened to you guys being the mayor of your particular cities? Just something fun, the story you just want to tell the world that can make people laugh. Let's start with Marvin.
Oh, you should give me a warning, because now my mind has gone blank. It's like all the clouds have fled away.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I tell you one?
Don't normally come up.
Yeah, I'll tell you an embarrassing story from before I was mayor,
All right.
that's okay. So I was asked to go and interview Tony Blair for a podcast. And so I went up to Downing Street, and I waited in the room for Prime Minister, as he was then. And I needed to go to the bathroom. So I went off to the bathroom, came back, interviewed him, half-hour podcast, went across the road to see my friends, and he said my flies were undone. So I must have been. I don't know if the Prime Minister noticed.
Wow.
Hopefully he didn't. But yeah, I thought, oh, geez, I've just been walking around Downing Street.
That happens to me all the time.
That was about 15 years ago, so I'm past it now.
Wow. That's funny. That is funny. That happens to me all the time, but I'm in no leadership position like you guys are, so I think no worries with me. Steve, is there any embarrassing moment, any funny moment that you recall, either as mayor or just you could tell us right now?
Well, I think Marvin knows all too well that when you're in politics, you have to give a lot of speeches, you have to meet a lot of people, you have to have a lot of public events. And I actually went to a speech, and I was in a hurry, and I got to the venue, got to the podium, and I completely forgot about what I was going to talk about. And so that you just have a mind blank, like Marvin just mentioned. You kind of look at it and you go, okay, what? And it lasts about 10 seconds. I had a pregnant pause. The other embarrassing moment, which I'll share with you, which everybody can, especially politicians, can relate to, was I received a honorary award from a group here in Orange County after an event occurred, and that touched my whole family. And I had a speech written, and it's the first time in my life that I broke into so much emotion I couldn't say a word. Literally 45 seconds, and the MC came up and said, "This is the best political speech ever." And I just said thank you, and that was it. And people came up afterwards and they said, if every politician would stop speaking, we'd be a lot better off.
Wow. Do you agree with that, Marvin?
Well, we talked off by saying about the need for dialogue. So yes, I know.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Listening's important. Absolutely.
It's those distinctions. Yeah, exactly. Listening.
Yeah. Okay. And I love that you mentioned dialogue, because that's really where we want to get with this conversation. And I think you guys already mentioned a little bit of your background, your history. And I would like to know, just recently, what have you been learning from history? History is known as, we study history so we don't repeat the same mistakes that we have committed as humans in the past. Right. I mean, that's what I was taught when I was in middle school, in high school. They always told us, don't repeat the same mistakes. That's why you have history. What have you guys learned recently from history that you don't want to commit the same mistakes in the future, especially in your leadership or roles as mayor, as former mayor, as a person involved in politics, as person of influence, what would you say is something you have learned, or maybe that you even want to change? Let's start with Marvin.
If I can just share two things, I suppose they're learnings or strengthenings of previous senses, really. I think the first is that the world is complicated and people are complicated. And as I was in an interview with the Financial Times, and I said, well, actually, all of us as fallen human beings have complexities, contradictions, and hypocrisies within us. So if you put 60 odd million people on an island, which is us over here, you don't think you're going to end up with contradictions and hypocrisies? I mean, that's just the way it is. And we need to be gracious towards each other in the face of those. We had an incident where a statue was pulled down to a slaver in the city. And the easy thing was to categorize the people that pulled him down as one group and the people that then organized a rally the weekend after to protect the cenotaph as another faction. But as you know what, people were multidimensional and they had a whole range of views on within that debate. And in fact, I'd say one of the richest times I had was with one of the people that turned out to run the rally the week after, concerned about what had happened the week before. And the second thing I would just say is that the status quo, non-change, is very adaptable. The forces of non-change are very adaptable and very resilient. So we end up with these momentous times in history. World War I was the war to end all wars, and then we had World War II. We come off that. We had the Cold War. You know, we've come through in your country, civil rights movement globally, all the independence movements. We had the anti-globalization protests. We had debt cancellation. We had the financial crisis. We've had all these moments where we said, okay, now's the time to stop and think about what we are doing and how we do it. And, you know, pretty soon we find out our systems, whether it be by personal choice or in personal economics and politics, are just repeating themselves with the same themes. And so change needs to be grabbed and pushed.
Thank you, Marvin. How did you respond to that, Steve? Or I don't know if you want to say what have you learned through history, or is there any reaction to that?
Well, I'll react to it first. Marvin's right, actually. And I want to start by saying, first of all, there's probably no greater country, no greater friend to our country than Great Britain. It's we share so many commonalities. As I'm listening to Marvin, forgetting the political monikers, I'd vote for you. And not knowing your ideology quite yet, you're very you hit all the key points. I'll add to what Marvin said. I agree with him. But the one thing that my family's been in politics for 100 years or more. The one thing that I hold dear to my heart is the government's great, but small government's better. So where Marvin and I might disagree is I'm a Maggie Thatcher fan, and I like government. I just think government in and of itself is inherently evil, because man's inherently evil, and so the less of it, the better. And what Marvin said was exactly right. We always have something that's going to be the last. It's going to be the last war. It's going to be the last financial crisis. It's going to be, and politicians tend to screw things up more than not, by not letting the market and the market forces kind of solve the problems. And we could go off on a tangent on that in our own experience from 2008. When some of the things that we did actually created more problems down the road in solving our financial crisis than it solved. So the other thing I'll say, your original question is, what have you learned? Wisdom is gained. A couple things that politically I've learned not to say, and that is never, because whenever I say I'll never agree or I would never be that person, or I'd never support that, I find myself over time finding refuge in some of the ideas of the never category. So, and I would say that I've learned that the older you get, the more seasoned you get in politics. There are some negatives, right? But there are a lot of positives, and the positives are experience and wisdom. And so, don't take shots at the old guys, because they have a lot to share with your country or your city or your state.
Wow. That's very open-minded, what you're just saying, never say never, pretty much. And how did you react to, especially Mayor Marvin, when I saw the video, people toppling down the statue, is that something you need to agree upon? Is that something you consent and you say, let's do it together? Is that something that stirs, conflict in your own heart? Is that something that inspires you? Like, what did you feel when that statue was going down?
So I will say at the beginning, I should have declared an interest as well, by the way. In terms of my relevance, obviously this is a global, world and all that. But I'm married to an American myself. I have 3 children who are all dual nationality. And
wow.
Much of my Jamaican family are Jamaicans, they call them, right? So I've got a lot of Jamaican family in LA, Atlanta, Maryland. So there's a lot of us over there. So on the statue, it'd be good to pick up on the government thing, but on the statue, no. I was clear that as an elected mayor of my city, I cannot condone criminal damage, and pulling down a statue was criminal damage because we didn't ask for it to be pulled down, didn't give permission. But at the same time, and this is a contradictory world, as I pointed out, at the same time, I cannot do anything other than admit that having a statue to a man that made his wealth by kidnapping and transporting 80 to 85,000 Africans across the Atlantic. We estimate around 19 to 20,000 of those were thrown overboard en route, and we have to have the records of the stock on the ships. It was anything other than an affront to me, not least because not only was it a statue, which statues don't actually do history, part of the myth. They don't teach us about history. They honor people. And there was a plaque on the statue describing him as a virtuous and as one of the most virtuous and wise sons of the city. So to me, that would be just bad history, basically. It's not emotional. No tears. It's just how do you do history properly? And the history around that character wasn't done properly, and there's a place of honor in the middle of the city. So, as I said, we'll go through the process now. The legal system will kick in for the people that were involved. But am I sorry the statue's gone? No.
Yeah, and I saw the statue later on. One of my little conflicts in my head was that I was seeing the statue go down, thrown in the river. It seemed like an act of, okay, we are getting rid of that sentiment of oppression, of slavery. Let's, throw it in the river. But then a few days later, I saw, wow, now it's getting pulled out and it's going to be put in a museum from what I read, right?
Yeah, we're putting it in a museum to do proper history around it. So actually what's happened to it will be told. That's part of the statue story now, because what happened around it, the point it became a focal point, it tells us something about the city and the world at this time as well.
So you think there was a place for the statue, but maybe the place was not in the middle of the city where you can read it like that? The proper place is a museum where you can see the history and why it's there?
Well, again, you've got to work out what you think statues are for. I don't think statues teach us history. Statues are there to honor people. And then, everyone's got their right to say who they want to honor as long as they own the full story of that. Someone kidnaps people. We had a character in Bristol in the UK, they called Jimmy Savile, who's a well-known TV personality, raised lots of money for charity, gave much money away. He was honored all over the place until they found out post his death that he was actually a paedophile. Well, then it didn't take long before they started to go and tear down his monuments and little statues to him around the place and memorials. People made a decision that they didn't want to honor him with statues because they found out the full story of who he was.
Mm-hmm. How do you react to that, Steve? Do you have any feelings? I know sometimes we're friends on Facebook, and I see sometimes similar narratives going on in the U.S. with the toppling down of monuments and things like that. How do you feel to what's happening in your own country, Steve, and maybe the picture of a statue falling in the city of London?
Well, I think what made me sad.
Bristol.
Yeah. What kind of made me sad is I'll never learn about that because I probably won't see it if I don't. The one thing I love about Europe and I love about London, and not only from a statutory point of view, but just from a historic point of view, is the history of the country. And it's hard to learn history if you're tearing things out. And I don't disagree with Marvin. We have Confederate soldiers that have statues, and there was a great war in our country fought in the 1860s that obviously a lot of people died fighting. And those statues got erected for a reason. And I think when you look back historically, and you talk to historians, they were erected to help bring our societies back together, which is interesting. Right after the Civil War, Robert E. Lee, who was the general of the Confederacy, surrendered, and what he said to all his soldiers is, "We'll be one again." Right? So we're not going to take up arms. We're not going to be guerrillas. We lost the war, but we're really Americans. Well, there are a lot of people in the South that want to continue with guerrilla action and want to continue the killing. They were wrong-headed. But one of the concessions that our country made was you can honor your own generals for their leadership, but it's one of the concessions we're going to make in order to bring you back into the states, the southern into the northern states, and be part of our nation. That's a context issue. So you really have to look at statues and say, why was it erected and in what context? Tearing things down or destroying books or burning books or not allowing free speech really rubs me the wrong way. And Beto, one of the things that we talk about is the Black Lives Matter issue, the BLM issue. It's more of a political issue than it is a cause. Black lives obviously matter. And it gets said so rhetorically, it doesn't mean anything. But the Black Lives Matter group that I send you information on is not a cause group anymore. It's a political fundraising group with ideals which are contrary to our country's. Back to the statues issue, I think you leave them alone. I think you put them in museums in an orderly way, and you leave them open for discussion. You can't learn about history by tearing things down. That's what the Taliban do. That's what ISIS just recently did in Iraq and Iran, not Iran, but Afghanistan. They destroy things. They don't want you to have any memory of them. Statues are there to learn, whether they're good or bad. Now, would I erect a statue today? Yeah, maybe to Jesus Christ, because he's perfect. But everybody can find fault in a human being. But unfortunately, in our country, Marvin, people want to tear down statues of Father Sarah, of some of our founders of Christianity in our country. And that's the natural outgrowth of this. Let's just tear things down. Let's destroy things that have no meaning to me, and they don't do it in an orderly or lawful way. And so it builds up more animosity on both sides when you allow this to happen, especially as an elected leader.
What do you think, Marvin? I see you're kind of like processing.
Well, no, I think I'm very careful in the way I describe things. I think I don't think it's fair or helpful to liken the tearing down of Colston to book burning, as the Nazis were obviously engaged in, for a number of reasons. One is, one of the frustrations, I mean, when we talk about not knowing about that history, not many people knew Colston anyway. The brand of Colston in Bristol was of a wise and virtuous son of the city who gave lots of money to poor people. Nothing about his relationship with Catholics, which wasn't very great. Nothing about the fact that he only gave certain money to certain strands within Protestantism, so you had to qualify, and nothing about the fact that he made his money from people trafficking. I think all these are really important. These are really important aspects. Book burning actually gets rid of knowledge. what's been happening over here, and I think in other parts of the world, is people are saying we want the full story. We want good quality history. Telling half the story, whether it be about founding fathers of this city or the UK, or actually founding fathers of the United States, telling half the story of what they are is not good history. And I'd say it's actually deceptive history. And it's really important that people have the opportunity to learn that. And I think the best place for statues, and again, I do agree, though, there is a process to go through. If the political system can serve up that process, right? And it doesn't always have the ability to create the conditions in which people can have rational debate, which is one of my concerns about the United States at the moment. But if the political system can create the conditions in which people can have that kind of discussion, then we'll be the better for it. If it cannot, there will be these moments where emotion and anger and frustration bleed out. I mean, and that's US history, isn't it? You had the Boston Tea Party, was not a peaceful act in many ways. And what then came off the back of that was not a peaceful act. It was a group of people expressing their desire for truth, or their sense of truth and for freedom.
Wow. Can we become, I love the idea that you guys were talking about. Steve, you mentioned General saying, let's become one. It's time to become one. And Mayor Marvin, or just Marvin, right? Marvin, you were saying in a country of 60 million people with difference of opinions, difference of ideas, different backgrounds, immigrants, natives, how do we become one? How can we be one? And then I just want to throw a few words. Steve was saying, Black Lives Matter, Donald Trump. When we throw these words in the mix, Jesus, religion, how do we become one when these are so embedded into who we are? How do you seek unity? You said at the beginning that you'd like for your city to be inclusive. So what are you doing as a leader to provoke unity, to provoke becoming one? Let's start with Steve. Or no, if you want to react to what Marvin was saying too, but in light of how can we be one?
Yeah. So again, in the context of the world, I don't know how you become one. I think e pluribus unum. That's on our penny. That's in many one. So we're all individuals. We all have our different backgrounds, and what I think Marvin. The better question is, how do we respect each other and have different while we have differences, and how do we communicate? Marvin touched on it earlier. We need to listen more. Marvin has an ideology. I have an ideology. I respect Marvin's ideology. I respect his country. That's where it really starts. If you start with on that basis, whether it's the United States or it's England or it's any country right now, the great civilizations disintegrate when there is no dialogue. Civil war occurs when the dialogue disappears, and so I think respect. The one thing I really admire about Great Britain, the English system, is they have a really interesting form of argumentation, especially in a parliamentary process. It's very civilized, and it's fun to watch, right?
To watch.
It's fun to watch. It is messy. It's fun to watch. It's messy. The Americans, the United States, were largely English that escaped the island because we wanted freedom. We're a little less civilized, so we are what we are. But it's not a knock on the United States. The United States is still the greatest country on earth, and we're everybody. But we're different. So I don't think we'll ever be one. I don't think I want to be one. I think I want to have respect for other cultures. And I think that's. I'm not a big fan of the United Nations. So I'm not a big fan of a lot of what they propose, but I am a fan of mutual respect.
Sweet. Marvin?
There may be some overlap here, and then there's obviously some divergence as well. The overlap is that one of the points I've been making in Bristol is what we're not trying to do is pretend we're all the same, right? We're different. And the art of placemaking, city making, country making is learning to live with our difference without it pulling us apart. So my own history is of someone of black and white heritage, right? Now, clearly I'll be categorized as black, and I've grown up as a black person. But what I do not allow is someone to take away from the fact that actually I've got, white roots in this country that go back longer than many people, certainly in the city. Now, my difference, my mixedness, does not pull me apart. I can set my being more Jamaican and recognizing my Jamaican heritage does not take away from my English heritage. If I'm recognizing my English heritage, it does not take away from my Welsh heritage. And if you know anything about the British Isles, England-Wales rugby matches are wars, right? Because of the way the English treated the Welsh back in the day. And my granddad from a small Welsh town called Merthyr Tydfil wasn't allowed to speak Welsh by English like oppression. You're talking about kind of Braveheart culture here, right? And when it's going on. So celebrating any aspect of my identity doesn't take away from anything else. And how we scale that up to the group is really important. And I don't pretend my mum's not white. I don't pretend my dad's not black. They just are, and we live coherent lives. I actually married a white American whose parents are from the Jewish, evangelical Republican tradition, right? And we are a family. My children are their grandchildren. So, sometimes we have to stay away from politics at the dinner table, but, we make that work. On the issue of reconciliation, I think that there's a very strong lesson, actually, from Christians to bring to bear here. So how do we live with our difference? How do we do reconciliation? I think that I'm really minded of Jesus in Luke 4 says that I've come to declare the year of the Lord's favor as a key passage for biblical understanding. That's from Isaiah 61. It's from Leviticus 25. The year of the Lord's favor was the year of Jubilee. And when God said, I'm making you a nation on this earth. But what did I'm not my iPad. What did God say to do to make sure that nation stayed together? Every 50 years, there was to be a year of Jubilee, which for me was about looking at the issue of economics. And I do not think you can build quality human relationships of any substance across gaps of wealth and power, poverty and powerlessness that have got to the point where they're perverse. I think if we look at Zacchaeus' pathway to reconciliation was to make restitution for what he'd done. Jesus did not deter him from doing so. I think it links up. We look in the book of Nehemiah. One of the judgments on the people was they were not practicing Jubilee. And I think that as Christians, we can be on the forefront of saying, if you want to do genuine reconciliation, it's free, but it's not cheap. It should be about as abstract and spiritual as the nails that went through Jesus' hand and the cross that was on his back. Outside of that, it should be about as real and physical as those things. And I think that's where the church can really be, on the front foot of bringing a mature understanding to what it takes to build genuine community and genuine societies.
And when you say, with your family, you got to be careful when you talk about politics and knowing that they come from a evangelical Republican background. How do you bring reconciliation in the midst of that? I mean, how do you bring conversation to what seems in a little bit divisive, right? When we think like Donald Trump is like, you either like him or hate him. It's like, what do you do then? What do you do, Steve?
Well, I mean, I'm from an evangelical background myself. Worked for the Tier Fund, which is an evangelical aid agency. Went to Eastern University in Philadelphia as well. So this is my background. And I just like to say, I don't think with Trump it's either you love him or you hate him. I'm just dismayed by him, and that's slightly different, but significantly different.
What makes you dismayed? Feel dismayed?
I see. To me, it's a hopelessness. It's divisive politics. And I'm even just the way that I think as a leader, one of your jobs is to craft a national conversation, to craft space for people to be able to talk across and understand and live with difference. And I just don't see it coming from the leadership.
Well, what do you think, Steve?
Well, I think it's perspective. It's the old adage: to one man's villain is another man's hero. I think I certainly don't, and I'll preface this by saying politics and religion are dangerous things to mix together. Although everything is politics, including Marvin. I was an Episcopalian, actually, so the Church of England was where I was confirmed. I'm more of an evangelical today because I left that church because of what I saw as a church that became too political and didn't represent what I'm looking for in my relationship with Christ. And so, I think in the end, to answer your question, Beto, I think all of us together can reconcile things, but it takes listening. The government won't do it. Donald Trump won't, but Tony Blair can't do it. It's really going to take each individual in this country to say we've had enough. Clearly, in our country, there is discontent with in Europe. Obviously, Barack Obama is very popular. My personal perspective of Barack Obama was not as good. I felt more like Marvin felt about Donald Trump. I don't think he brought people together. I think he was divisive, and so that's a perspective. We have two different individuals with similar sentiment on different people. I was in China in 2015 with a group of mayors, and on one of those infamous trips where they take you there and they baptize you in what's great about China. And we had dinners with all the governors, and 4 governors and 6 mayors in 5 different provinces. And we weren't supposed to talk politics. That's the one thing. You can't talk Taiwan. You can't talk politics. And so the very last dinner, the governor of Guangdong said to the group of 9 of us, including John Chang, who's our state treasurers, he said, "I want to know who you think is going to win the election." This is 2015. Everybody went around and they were apologetic about Donald Trump, but of course Hillary Clinton's going to win. I was the last person there, and I said, "I think Donald Trump's going to win, not because I like the man, because I like the message." And I think I represent, and Beto knows me well enough. Marvin, you really don't. Beto knows me well enough to understand that a lot of the sentiments of this country are represented by my feelings, and that is we've been disappointed with what we have in politics. It's not necessarily Barack Obama. Washington D.C. has become Versailles, and there is an immense backlash against that philosophy. This country doesn't want Versailles. We don't want a queen. As much as I love your country, I could not fathom having a queen. That just doesn't. It runs against our culture. And Washington D.C. and the politics have become overbearing on our society. Lobbyists, messages, and lack of action. Donald Trump does what he says he's going to do, and that's something that's very American to the majority, the flyover country in our nation. So while I'm disappointed sometimes in what he says, he's human. He's a human being. I'm disappointed in Beto, but I love Beto. All right. It goes without saying. Everybody I know, I get disappointed in. There's nobody other than Jesus Christ that's perfect, and Donald Trump is not one of them. But I think in the end, he represents the change this country wants. So, and I apologize for any inference, Marvin, that there is, because I don't think Donald Trump attacks you. He's our leader. But philosophically, I think he's 100% correct. He's just very unvarnished in his approach. He's not English, that's for sure.
Unvarnished is a word. I mean, I would say about government, because there is a view view there. I can understand. I mean, I'm not a diehard royalist by any stretch of the imagination. Because we live here doesn't mean we are, followers of the institution. And when people say they're proud of a country, my country, I'm wondering what we mean. It sometimes, because there are elements to be proud of. I'm proud of our National Health Service, for example. I'm proud that our police don't, I'm proud that our police by consent and don't carry guns unless they're called out for special situations. But at the same time, I recognise that disproportionate numbers of black people still die in police custody, are stopped and searched. And I'm also very wary that even in my own city, a fifth of our children grew up in income-deprived households. I'm not proud of that. So for me, just to say I'm proud of something where we've got such poverty, gaps between rich and poor, hopelessness, mental health in the city, is a challenge. And what I've sought to do is to celebrate the things that are great about Bristol, 2 world-class universities, Brunel, a port, world-class tech, and all these other things that we brandish on the global stage. But for the sake of the integrity of our city, is to acknowledge that there are tens of thousands of people in the city that don't share that. As for government, I totally recognise what you say, and that sense of despair with political institutions. When I was at university, I came out with a catchy phrase that I worked with, that government was corrupting, and could not be saved. And so I swore that I would work on the outside of government all the time, working for campaign organisations, trying to get the change I need, I was hoping for. I've obviously gone on a bit of my own journey with that, and waking up to, I thought was essentially some bad mentoring by people who were phenomenally members of the establishment. But my concern is that if we don't have government, it doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means there's something else there. So in my city, I'm an elected politician, but the University of Bristol is a small town within Bristol. It is essentially its own government with thousands of students. I was at Yale a few years ago. It's the biggest economic organisation in New Haven with its own police force. It's a small town. There are companies now that are with economies bigger than nations. Facebook is a classic example. They are, in a sense, governance. So if we may have faults with government, and I'm not a fan of big government or small government. I'm a fan of government that's big enough to do what it needs to do, which is where companies and the private sector has not managed to take care of the poor. We come in and we do the job of working with them to take care of the poor. But what's that phrase, right? Power abhors a vacuum. If we don't fill a space of governance with as faulty as it is, democratically accountable organizations, some other organization will fill that space that is less democratically accountable, and actually whose primary responsibility is to produce good numbers for shareholders. And the drive to produce good numbers may not actually come with any values. And that's a real concern. It'd be very dangerous just to withdraw without having a clear idea of what goes in its place.
What do you think, Steve?
Marvin does a lot of things that I agree with. That I think the difference is I don't think something will replace something else, because ultimately what makes our country great is individuality and individual power. So the power, and Marvin, you probably know this because you're a highly educated man, but the power in our country, our founding fathers wanted it to be at the local level. They wanted it to be the mayors. They wanted to be the counties. They wanted it to be the associations of men, farmers. What's happened in our country is power has moved to D.C. And I've seen it in my lifetime. I'm 57 years old. I went to Washington, D.C. 30 years ago. And it's a different place than it is today. Today it's run by lobbyists, multinational lobbyists. A lot of English, a lot of French, a lot of Russians, a lot of different people, and that's not what our country wants. And I think in the end, I'm not anti-government. I'm small government with a capital S, and one that reacts. As a mayor, the great thing about our city is Beto could come talk to me about issues, and he knows that. And as an example, I set out a goal in our city. We have 3,200 miles of roads. 16 square mile city. I set out to walk every single street and meet every single person I could meet on those streets. And that experience alone is unique. And that's really what our founding fathers wanted in our country. They wanted us to be connected with our residents. But compassion is a fleeting process. And I don't think government's role is to solve all of society's ills. I think government's role is to create an equal, level playing field so that we all have the same opportunity. And I think Beto is a great example of that. Government hasn't done a lot to give him what he has today. His own efforts are. A lot of people like to take credit for what Beto is today. But the reality is he is what he is today because he's an individual with a dream. That's the bedrock of our country. He doesn't need a government program unless Beto, there's some government program you're looking for that I can help you with. I don't think you want to hear that.
Yeah,
well,
so,
I think
yes, sure.
I mean, I do take your points. I mean, there's a few things you say that really kind of spark thinking. First of all, your point on local leadership and devolving. I'm actually involved in a big global movement on that at the moment. So the Global Parliament of Mayors Migration Council, even I've been involved with the US Conference of Mayors, that you may have been involved in yourself, which is about, I spoke at the Boston event in 2018. I gave the final talk where Marty Walsh was hosting.
Sure.
My point is that actually global governance is busted as it currently tries to work. It's not just about bad policy, it's about bad machinery. And national governments working alone are no longer equipped to cope with the world's challenges the way they are. So our drive has been, how do you move national and international governance into its next iteration that will have the leaders of cities and networks of cities as equal partners in shaping national and international policy? So that we're facing this around COVID in the UK. A national government that stands behind desks in London, trying to think up solutions for Manchester and Bristol, who are radically different cities in terms of their makeup. That model doesn't work. So I'm all for that power being devolved down. But I would say, though, that I don't think, there is something that feeds itself in politics, amassing power into the center, but that doesn't happen with politics in an abstract. I think that's tied in with the economy too. So DC controls the United States, but surely so does Wall Street, and that stockbroker, the kind of the shareholder drive. And it strikes me that what you begin to enter into is a conversation also about principalities and powers. The world is more than just a collection of individual decisions. There are processes that exist beyond any individual's decision. The great crash of 1929-32 was one of those. There's no single individual decided to crash the economy. It just, a process that feeds itself and collects itself. The financial crisis of 2008 would be another one. Sometimes wars are like that. It's not that an individual decides, but, events begin to rally themselves up. So I would that's why I'm a bit wary about saying that what anything is a collection of individuals. I think there are these impersonal, disembodied processes and forces that shape our world that we're part of. If I just say one other thing, just about individual endeavour as well, that I think is also worth bearing in mind. The UK is one of the most socially immobile countries in the OECD, interestingly, along with the United States. That it was an economist said, one of the biggest decisions you can make in life, you have to make, is who your parents are. People's life chances are determined by the circumstances into which they're born, before their effort and their talent. This is just what the data tells us. And so that is a fundamental injustice. It's for those individuals. It's an economic liability in that we leave millions of pounds worth of talent undeveloped every year simply because it was born into poverty. And it's a political responsibility. In my city, business has actually been getting quite mobilized around this, working with us, because they're realizing that you cannot compete internationally with so much talent left undeveloped. But primarily, this is about a political collection of policies across housing, mental health, access to educational opportunities that can go some way to redress those inequalities. And to me, that's just like taking care of widows and orphans, which is the prophetic instruction from days of old. How do we stop the circumstances of your birth being the single most important determinant of where you end up in life.
Wow.
I can't touch some of the large nets that you just cast on that, but I'll say this: the guy that I'm looking at right now, who's hosted this event, is an example of why economic equality is more a figment of your mind than it is of the reality in this country. If Beto wants to make $1 billion, I mean, I started my life working for a billionaire out of college that started with zero, and I've worked for 3 other family offices currently, people that have net worths over $1 billion, and not one of them was a generational individual. They're all people that made their money without the help of a dynasty. And so what's unique about our country is the social injustice did exist and does exist, but you're far more inclined to find it as an archaeology of your society in Europe than you are in the United States. There's nothing stopping you in this country. Educational inequality, Marvin, I laugh at that because I sit on several boards, educational boards, and the number of technically minority groups receiving financial aid is so disproportionate to ordinary secular or white folks in our country. It's just over the top different. So the only thing stopping you in our country is your attitude and whether you really want to achieve something. Nothing giving stuff to people are one of the biggest challenges and outgrowths that we've struggled with since the 1960s. I'm in the housing business, as an example, Marvin. So I can tell you from experience, housing programs and how they work and how they succeed and how they fail. Rarely does government get involved in the housing program that doesn't have massive challenges and massive fraud. And if you're a true free market person and you understand economics, the only thing that dictates affordability is supply. So if you don't have enough supply, you have to increase that supply. And if you increase the supply, the cost will go down. We don't set our prices based upon an index of the industry. We set our prices based upon demand. So it's kind of off the topic, but you hit on one of my hot buttons in terms of economic inequality. It's just not there. Beto's a living example of that.
Well, you already mentioned me 3 times, as you know. I love it. I love it. Though. I think really what you're saying is, capitalism is good, right? You work hard, you earn what you're working for, and I think there's some truth in that, especially for me, for sure. If I don't work hard, I'm not gonna get anything. But I also see, especially we're on ChristianPodcast, and we Marvin has mentioned a few scriptures that point out how Jesus lived or how we are to act. And one of the things that it's coming to my mind, as you say, even when we were talking maybe like a week or so ago, you were sending me some emails about the whole Black Lives Matter and politics and stuff in America. And one of the things that I read on the article, it was actually, you said a Nobel Prize said to you, a Nobel Prize recipient, that he said, the only place where communism exists is in heaven, right? But then when we read Acts 2, it actually describes the church as being so generous that they were selling all their possessions and they had all things in common, taking care of the needs of each other. And I think, for sure, that's not even political. That's just a human issue. It's people taking care of each other because they believe that's how God created us to be. Now the thing here is, how does that translate to politics? Really, how does that translate to leadership in being the mayor of a city? How is your faith inform your politics? And this is something I've learned recently. Do we allow politics to inform our faith, or does faith inform our politics? So what do you think is what happens in you guys? You guys are in leadership positions. You guys have the influence. How does your faith shape? And you already mentioned a little bit of it, but how does your faith shape your politics?
Who's first?
Go.
Go,
Go ahead, Marvin.
I know you go, Stephen. It's okay.
I think it's just foundational, but I think we as human beings are influenced by what and shaped by foundational aspects, and without religion there is no foundation. Morality, our laws, everything is based upon the teachings of Christ. So I think it's self-evident. I think I'm probably more fallible than Marvin. I'm not perfect, and I don't mean that in a bad way, Marvin. I think you're a tremendously talented guy, but I struggle with absorbing some of the political decisions of our leaders, and when I was a leader myself and active, I struggled with forgiveness and things that are human. So, but without my faith, I think I would have been a lesser of a man.
So no, please don't. It's not. I'll go on a race to the bottom on fallibility here. I'm honest. I'm a fallen human being working with an imperfect political party in a broken political system in a desperate world. And where I am at is saying, how can I try and make the best out of this, right? And I challenge people in the church back in being involved in political systems, because I say this is like the parable of the talents. Sometimes I say to good people about getting involved in public leadership, and they say, oh, it's not for me. My point is, well, maybe it's not actually about you. Maybe it's about a set of talents and abilities you have, and you bringing those and putting them at disposal. And actually put them into play in a democratic system in which you don't walk away from the table with everything you want. And there are some days you're going to go home and you're going to say, yeah, we did good today. I did that negotiation and we came out on top. And some days you're going to go home and you're going to say, we didn't do good today. I got out-negotiated, or we weren't able to make it work, or we ended up choosing the least worst option. To the outside world, that looks like, you sold out, you compromised and whatever. But actually, to those who've been in positions in leadership, not just political, but in church leadership as well, this is an everyday occurrence, right? Is how do you make the best out of a fallen world? So I'm in that boat too. As for my faith and politics, I get a lot of hassle on this. Well, I say a lot. There's efforts to portray me as some kind of, mad guy trying to introduce a theocracy into Bristol and all these types of nonsense. My point is that, I grew up with just my mum, right? We grew up on benefits in a council house, public housing in the UK. I was lost for a while. In the 1980s, we had the big riots in UK cities. We were poor. We, struggled to eat have enough food in the house. I did all that. And what I would say, there were a number of key interventions that helped me through, right? Having a stable home, having a loving mum and family, boxing, having a couple of teachers that really believed in me, travel. I managed to get outside the city, and my faith, which gave me a sense of the infinite and gave me a sense of purpose and meaning beyond just trying to be rich. And so I had a sense of purpose. Now, I'll challenge anyone to come and tell me that I should not be informed by the thing that helped me get out of the circumstances of my childhood, And I don't, an anti-faith perspective on that, I'm ready to go if you want to have that discussion. And I'd say to challenge anyone. And I know you're not necessarily a fan, but Barack Obama, in his speech in 2004, said, what do you expect someone to do? Pretend, put their faith coat on the hook when they come in the door and pretend that's not them? No. And likewise, people who don't have a faith shouldn't come in and pretend that they have one just to try and meet the room. Be authentic and be yourself. And I can no more separate my faith from who I am than I can my blackness and my mixed heritage and my Englishness. It just flows through me, and I mix that with my experience of the world and come up with my approach to what my priorities are and how we try to solve them.
Wow. Beautifully said, man. How can you affirm each other in your roles of leadership? Just kind of wrapping things up. How would you affirm Marvin, Steve?
Well, I think he's a talented leader. He's obviously a good man, a follower of Christ, from a great country, from a great city. We have a lot of similarities. That's what I will say, Marvin. We have a lot in common, probably more than you realize. And I think it's important that all of us understand and share that communications and respectful conversation is essential if our world will survive, if our countries are going to survive, if our states are going to survive. So we can't. And I will add that, Marvin, I really don't care what your color is, and I don't mean that I don't patronize you, but I don't see you as anything other than an Englishman, other than somebody from Great Britain. So, and I say that to Beto all the time too. It's what makes our country great. I'm just used to it. I celebrate what's great about us. But Marvin, thanks for your words. We have a lot in common. You're always invited. You can come stay with me in California if you ever come out here. You're invited, and you can see, Beto and I can have some fun with you.
That would be great.
Share the word. But I think, there'd be chance for a rich conversation. I think, personally, what I would say is, to affirm, I'd say I believe you believe what you're saying. And that's not meant in a condescending way, and that matters to me, right? I don't like, that's not cheap one of the things I look for in people when I'm talking to them is, do I think you're really sincere about what you're saying, even if I differ with you about what you're saying? And if people do, you can work with that. I've got a friend here in the UK who used to be in the National Front, which is a racist party, right? Which is a kind of, come out of the 1970s, attacking black people, Asian people. He's a vicar today in the Church of England. But the interesting thing is he'll be honest about his story, and that's interesting. So I find that really rich. And I don't think you find, the challenge of reconciling and building a relationship does not come across because we're all the same. It comes about because we are working with our difference. So one is I believe you believe what you're saying, even if I disagree with your ending point. And that gives us the space for a conversation. The second point I'd say is something I say here, not on religious disputes, but on any dispute. Let's not jump to the end of the line and talk about where we disagree. Let's begin to move upstream and find out the premise of what our experience of the world. And let's begin to find those points at which we do agree. Again, not looking for cheap agreement or cheap reconciliation, but sometimes we get tied up in the conclusions, and we've missed out the fact that the reason we're having a different conclusion is because we've got a different premise, or we've got a fundamentally different view on an event or a aspect of reality. And we're not going to solve the ultimate, visual difference until we get underneath what's going on. And I think it's not really an affirmation, I suppose maybe it's an encouragement, and I hope it's an encouragement, is that in a world in which through social media, some of the political rhetoric, we got a situation now in which people go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in anger, right? You're either on or you're off. It's one-dimensional. It lacks nuance. it doesn't allow space for nuance, contradiction. Yeah, there's no graciousness as well, which is something I've talked about in my city a lot, the need for graciousness. We've got to find a way of people with different conclusions facilitating the discussion and helping other people to facilitate those discussions. Because if we don't, it's not good. We're going to end up with a very bad situation. Well, we've got one, but it will get worse.
And Beto, let me add one thing.
Sure.
As Marvin, I couldn't agree with him more. He's 100% right. Sometimes the best reconciliation is understanding our differences are not fatal. That we can have a different opinion and we can still love each other, and much like our families, it doesn't separate us. We don't have to agree on everything, and a good mayor understands it.
My only, sorry, and it's not to be a downer, but my only qualification on that is that in the middle of our need to do that, the world is not standing still. And people are still dying because of poverty. And I know, and I appreciate that you see me as English, and that I got no, I talk about my mixedness a bit, and my blackness and my whiteness. I don't mind talking about those things because I think it's interesting. My wife is actually Swedish, Danish heritage, white American. So, our conversation and is interesting. She's gone on her own journey over the last 16 years. We've been married 15 years. I should get that right, shouldn't I? But we do need to have those conversations, but also the platform's burning now. And the consequences of not dealing with our political and economic inequalities are playing themselves out in the lives of people every day. So I think there's something about the church becoming quite, very proactive and quite, and bringing those lessons of reconciliation to the world with immediate effect. I'd always thought actually of the church that, this Jesus tells us, how can you be trusted in big things if you can't be trusted in small things? The Jubilee is about eternal reconciliation, right? The way we were told to do it was, to be honest, to be straight, it's written with a massive redistribution of economic wealth and power. I'm concerned of the church. If the church cannot be trusted with Jubilee in matters of money and property on this earth, how on earth does it think it is carrying a message of eternal Jubilee, which is of infinitely more value to God? And I think that's a challenge for us.
Wow, Marvin, you're a preacher and a prophet.
No.
Well, I'm sort of like a pastor here, and I totally agree with what you're saying in the sense that the church, first, Jesus said, the gates of hell won't prevail against my church. So I think we're going to see in the future, we're in the 21st century, at the start of the 21st century. I think even COVID actually made us realize, like, hey, it's the 21st century, the 20th century is behind. You got a whole brand new century ahead of you. And I think we're just realizing that. And I think the church is going to thrive because it's based on the promise of Jesus, and his promises will always, this is just seeing it from the perspective of faith. The promises of Jesus will always come to pass. But I think maybe the church, as we know it, will be different than what has been, than what we are used to know as the church. Because the church of Jesus is going to be the one that is evident in the way they live their lives, right? Jesus also said, they will know you are my disciples by the way you love one another. So I think the evidence of the true image of Jesus is going to be in how we love one another in the 21st century. I want to thank you so much, guys, for having this awesome conversation. I think there's a lot of depth in what we just discussed. I think I'm even going to replay it a couple times because it's just so profound. This conversation. Is there anything else you guys want to say before we wrap things up? Is there one last thought you want to make people aware of, or even each other, or any questions you guys have for one another?
No, it was nice talking to you both. Thank you for the time.
All right.
It's a
So
pleasure.
good. Well, I want to commend you, Mayor Marvin Rees from Bristol, England, in your walk of faith, in your being a man of action, in your leadership. I just want to say, continue to do so in the light of who Jesus is in your life. And I just have one more question for you, because it's like, what is your next step in politics? Are you aspiring to, or do you have any higher calling right now that you sense? Or
I don't know. I'm running for one more term. And then if I win after that, I step down, because I think 8 years is enough for anyone.
Bravo. We agree.
Yeah,
We
I think
agree.
you become an anchor on a place. The city will need to reinvent itself after that time, and then we'll see what happens.
That's a great leader, Beto.
That's so good. Any last thoughts, Steve, other than cheering him on last term?
I'll support your campaign. Send me an envelope.
Thank you.
So good. Thank you guys for being on this call. Really appreciate your time. And, I pray that you guys continue to walk in your faith, and maybe see you guys later when you come visit us here in Southern California. Make sure you give us a call, and we'll for sure love to show you around.
I've got family in LA, so I'm supposed to be over. So.
Well, no, we're in Orange County, so a little bit better, Marvin.
Yeah. And just so you know, one of the other things about Costa Mesa that I forgot to mention, but it has the highest revenue mall in America, which is South Coast Plaza.
Actually, in the world.
In the world, wow.
Really?
Yeah. So Costa Mesa gets a big fat check from the mall.
Before COVID, Beto.
That's true. Right now, it's a little slow. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.